Hello everyone and welcome to another workshop in the Polaris Hackathon series. Today we have a special workshop on adventure using NeoFS. With us is Alex Walker, the developer from Neo Community, who is sponsored by Neo Grants Program. Hi Alex, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Yeah, hi Sam. I'm Alex. If anyone ever has questions for me after this talk, I'm Config Wizard on Discord. I've been a developer now for about 10 years. Before that, I was a mechanical engineer simulating internal combustion engines for research at universities. The premise being if you can detect issues with engines before you actually build them, they don't explode on you. And that led me into the world of software engineering, which is how I ended up one day here talking to you all. A while back, I don't know when it was, about November, I've been extremely interested in Neo for 4 years or so. And a while back in about November, sort of joined the community and decided that my new vendetta was going to be get my head around NeoFS. Before that I was doing quite a lot of development on Solidity and writing smart contracts for NFTs over there. And in a nutshell, really didn't like IPFS. I didn't like the way it was being used and what you could do with it. I thought it was just a bit like sort of pastebin, really. And that's why I decided that I wanted to find out more about NeoFS. So Sam has rightly called this talk. It's an adventure in discovering and learning about NeoFS. So before I really get into this, I just want to thank guys at the NSPCC in St. Petersburg, because I've been hammering them with questions probably nearly daily since I got involved with this. And early on, the guys at Neo News Today, I want to thank as well. Very early on, I sort of reached out to them and said, "Look, I'm learning about this. I'd like to write some documentation," and they offered me a small grant to get that going. And then as I did that, they actually increased that grant for me to get that documentation out further. So I'd like to thank them as well. I think probably it's important to start this by stating that it's still all very early days, even for me. It's all alpha. But the thing that got us to this talk today was while reading and learning and researching this and following the community, I think quite a few people are very interested in NeoFS, but a few of those people had experience with Go. And that was the sort of strength or something that I could bring to it, because the SDK, or most of the SDK around NeoFS is written in Go. So that gave me a slight head start. So as a result of that, I think speaking to the NGD, they offered me a grant to see if we could build a RESTful API into NeoFS so that developers who weren't necessarily so familiar with Go would still be able to use NeoFS. And I realize we're partway through, or quite far through, the hackathon at the moment. I'm also entering. But maybe that will be something that people here can take advantage of. Again, it's all very new, so anything that doesn't work, please don't be shocked. But please do ask me questions and open issues and pull requests if you wish to. But I'll show you that as well. Sam, is there anything else you want to cover before I sort of show my journey through all of this?
Nope. I think thanks for the introduction. It's your stage now.
Great. Okay, so when I started out, the first thing I wanted to understand was what can you actually do with NeoFS? And the most important thing here is it's by far the most powerful decentralized file system I've come across. I've researched quite a few different options, but what you can do with NeoFS outweighs all the others by a mile and more. However, as a result of that, there's quite a lot to learn. There's quite a lot to get your head around. And most of that comes down to the permissions and capabilities of it. By the way, I can see a couple of people from NSPCC are on the call, so I apologize if I make any technical errors in my descriptions of anything. As I say, I'm still getting my head around all this as well. But the first thing I needed to do was to write down exactly what I thought and understood about a NeoFS. So if you are looking to understand what you can actually do around this, they have moved my documentation to the developers.neo.org/docs portal. And I wrote the stuff under the NeoFS topics, which Stephen has put here for me and reviewed for me. So if you are wondering what you can do, I suggest starting in the overview to get an idea of what's going on, where the libraries exist, etc., etc., where you need to go and get your gas and stuff like that. And I actually saw on the NeoFS Discord the other day someone asking why they couldn't see their gas on NeoFS. That was also caught me out. You need to transfer your gas into NeoFS before you will see your balance. So once you've started there, I suggest going over to the concepts to get an idea of the sort of words and topics that you'll see as you research and look around this. And by far the most interesting one, but quite a complicated one, is the EACL, is the extended permissions you can add to your files and containers on NeoFS. And that takes us to the next concept. So the container, this is not a directory, or it's not a folder. You may think of it as a folder, and it sort of can be treated a bit like a folder, but again, it's much more powerful than just a folder on your computer. And at the risk of giving away too much at this point, because this is my entry into the hackathon, my entry is to build a GUI that gives you all the capabilities that you can do on NeoFS in a sort of Dropbox-esque fashion. So this is a very old version of it. This is not how it looks for our hackathon entry. But this is our container overview here. Some of these don't have names because I'm still been playing around and developing on it, but that's fine. A container, although if I go inside one of these, I actually don't know if any of these have anything in. Yeah, this has quite a lot in, I think. A container, all a container does is define where in the world your files and objects, as they're really called, live. And you can specify, I only want my objects and my data to be stored in Europe or Southeast Asia, or I only want them to be stored in countries where the temperature is less than 10 degrees in summer. You can make all these kind of decisions. And that's what a container is. It's merely the rules in where your data will be stored. And then there are nodes all over the NeoFS decentralized system that will all have their own sort of spec. You know, do they use an SSD drive and all this kind of stuff? When you set your policy, which is how you define a container's existence, you will then be storing your data on nodes that meet your policy requirements. And then the containers just handle the distribution of your objects around the world. So that's already a pretty interesting feature of NeoFS that doesn't really exist in other options. So that took a bit of getting used to. And then once you've got a container, you have your objects. And a container can then also have permissions. You can have a container that is purely private. Only you can ever access it. Only your wallet can ever access that container. You could also have a container that's completely public. Anyone can write to it. Anyone can read from it. Anyone can delete from it, etc., etc. And that's your basic permissions on a container. But once you've got your basic permissions, you can actually restrict those permissions further with this EACL, the extended permissions. So if you make a container, for instance, and you say, right, I want a container that is means that my data will be stored in Europe, and I want anyone to be able to read, write, delete to that container or from that container. You can then add extended permission to that. So you can then say, okay, but actually I only want this public key or this address to be able to do that. Or I want to issue a bearer token allowing this specific wallet to be able to write to this container for the next 2 hours. So you can make very, very specific and granular permissions on a container. You can also, I believe, although I haven't specifically done it, you can also do that to specific objects within a container. And for the sake of argument, an object is a file, usually in the way that you're going to imagine using it, but it's data, really, I guess. So those are some of the more powerful things, or the powerful things that you can do with NeoFS that don't really exist as far as I've seen in other options around the blockchain world. But they're also the ones that make things a little bit more complicated. So once you've sort of got your head around those ideas, it's then time to go and find what you need. So you're going to need, if you're going to start at the Go level, you're going to need the SDK and you're going to need the NeoGo library. The SDK is much more about controlling NeoFS using Go, and the NeoGo library is much more about controlling anything on the Neo blockchain as a whole. So your wallet, smart contract interaction, etc., etc. And then I've added, because while writing the documentation, there was quite a lot of copy pasting of code. So there is a few helper functions that I've written that I just refer to back when using them. So once you've had a read through all of that, this sort of the capabilities here are the area where you may go and have a look as to how you might want to do things. This is really where my adventures in NeoFS began. Firstly, I realized that what I needed to do was make a container and put an object in a container. The first thing was I needed to create a container. By the way, I realize a lot of people here may not be interested so much in the Go level, but I just want to go through how I got there. So you're creating a container, you're going to need a placement policy. This is what I was talking about where it's going to be stored and what nodes around the world will store it. You're going to need to have an understanding of what a Neo ID is, or you're not a Neo owner ID, which you don't really have to have too much of an understanding. But basically, you get an owner ID from a public key. And then that's how you use your owner ID to define yourself when you're creating containers and things like that. So this is creating here I'm creating a container. But as you can see, I pass through this placement policy. And if I just go to policies here, policies are sort of SQL type scripts that define what you want. So here's one. You could say, I want the country where the country equals Finland or Iceland. We'll define that as a cold country. And then I can say I want to filter on cold countries where the storage type is SSD and the price per unit is less than 100. So you build up these sort of policies, and that's what makes a container. If we go back to a container, you can then see I use the policy to create the container with that container policy. I'm the owner, and with what basic permissions that we want to define that container to have. And then you can do, once you've done that, you can list all the containers you own, you can retrieve the containers you own, you can delete them, etc., etc. So then, where did I see that? Yeah, so then it's probably worth just having a look at the sort of permissions, and that comes under the ACL permissions category. So in here, I've defined the sort of things you can do. So here is an EACL basic read-only rule. So this says it's read-only, but it's public. It's read-only, but it also has the ability to have extended permissions on top of that. Not all permissions do. If they don't have extended ACL, you can't increase the permissions once you've created that container. So I've pulled these crudely from the GitHub of the NSBCC. But so for instance, you've got public basic rules, but then you've got the ACL public basic rules. So if you just set that, you can't change that out. Sorry. If you decide that your container is that level of rules, then you can't change that after the container has been created. However, if you were to use this one, it's the same set of basic rules, but you will be able to extend it afterwards. And I'm going through this in quite a lot of detail because it took me quite a lot of time to pull all this information together. So hopefully if someone comes across this video, they will learn quite a lot very quickly rather than having to scrabble around the web trying to find all this information. Now, they actually are just binary values, but luckily if you're using the SDK, you can just refer to them by their nice names, as it were. Once you've got your basic container, you then have your extended rules. I'm not going to go too detailed into this, but you basically create a table, and that table has extended rules on top of it. So in this case here, we're saying for all other users, I want to create a set of rules, and all other users is basically specifying not a specific wallet or public key. And then you can filter, so you can say, well, I'll go into this a bit later, but objects that you're going to put in your container can have attributes. So imagine you had a file, then that file had metadata attached to it, and within that metadata you have key value pairs. So you could say that on an object you're going to create a key, let me in, and value okay. And then you could say, well, I only want people to be able to access objects within this container that have that specific attribute, and then they wouldn't be able to access one that said let me in, no, for instance. So that's a pretty powerful feature that you can add to objects as well there. And then you say match string equal to, and there are other sort of matching rules that you can set there, and whether or not you should allow or deny on that. It does get pretty granular, this, to the point where if you want to allow, if for instance I wanted to allow Sam to only be able to read from my container, I would also have to define that he can't delete, he can't append, he can't do anything else. I'd have to define all the things he can't do and the thing he can do. You have to be quite careful about it. They can get quite detailed, and that's something I also came across in my travels as well while I was learning and getting a bit confused about. So I do sort of mention that at this point. So anyway, it goes on and on. There's lots of stuff in here that will hopefully get people's head around it, and hopefully alongside this video that will be handy. So then on top of that, on top of all of that, you can set these rules against the container as we just specified. But I can actually also create a bearer token with the similar set of rules. And what that means is I don't actually attach the rules to the container itself. I create a bearer token with that set of rules in the table, and then I could send that bearer token to whoever I like, whether it be via email or share it in a public container or whatever it may be. And then once they've got that bearer token, they will actually be able to access that container based on the same set of rules. However, in this case, they have the permission sort of ticket rather than the container knowing it beforehand. That's pretty cool too, because you could say that for the next 24 hours, a winner of a competition can access all of my content within a certain container. I can think of multiple uses for that kind of thing. It may be video sharing or something like that, or it may be early access to music, maybe something like that. And you're giving them sneak previews and things like that. And when I was going about this, I was trying to think of this from a sort of much more consumer perspective. Although I know most of the people in the Discord are probably developers, the consumer aspect of this is what I was most interested in. Hence why I've been trying to make something very sort of Dropboxy here, because I'd like to be something that people who don't necessarily know so much about coding could still understand the power and capabilities of. So this is something that I'm actually doing quite a lot on with regards to the hackathon. I'm trying to learn and use this as a big element of our project. So I won't go too much more into that just because I've been talking for quite a long time. But what all this basically led me to was to create a sort of what I'm calling a wrapper around the SDK, because as I say, it's quite granular, all of the work that goes into this, and you can end up writing the same thing quite a few times. So I decided I was going to write a lot of it for myself, really, to not have to rewrite it. And what that led to was code that covers all of these topics that I just sort of went over. But also I've created a folder full of examples for people if they want to come and sort of just run these things. So if you wanted to see how to create a container, you can go to the containers example and you can go in here and we can have a look. And so it's using sort of flags. So where's your wallet? What's the wallet password? Do you need to just create a wallet, etc., etc. But once you've done that, you can start to see it sort of coming together. This is all boilerplate. There we go. So there's my policy that we talked about a minute ago. So this says replicate it twice, and select replicate each object. I want every object replicated twice, i.e. that's the sort of redundancy. However, this CBF, I forget what that stands for, but what it basically means is multiply this twice by this, and then by 3 again, because that's the default. So you'd actually end up with 12 replicas of your data in that case, I believe. Then I want to select any 2 nodes from all the nodes in the world. So I'm not actually specifying where I want. So it would get distributed quite aggressively across the world in that case. And what I'm saying is the basic ACL I want is public basic rules. So it means that you can read, write, and execute if you have a wallet and you're anybody and you know my container's address or ID, really. Then create the container and then wait. I'm waiting 30 seconds just so that gets propagated, because that gets propagated actually on the blockchain. So we have to wait for that to be paid for in my NeoFS gas. And then I will get back an ID of that. And then I'll get back an ID of that container that I can then use. Yeah. Yeah. Hang on. Once you've created that container, and you can see this is all public, this repository, this config wizard / gas pump API on GitHub, and I'm just in the containers create container code there. But once you've created it, you'll get an ID back for your container, which is a bit like that. And once you've got that back, you can do things like delete it or even list all of your containers in there. And I'm not going to go into every example because we have an hour in total. I've been talking for 20 minutes. At that point, you've now got a container. You can then go and create an object. So you can upload an object, for instance. And there's code here on how you would then go about doing that. In a very similar way, you'll see a lot of this code doesn't really change. I'm getting my wallet here, getting the container that we just created. So you'd have the ID of the container. And now you create your bearer token we mentioned and session tokens. This is what you need to identify yourself when you're doing this. You'll need a session token. And if you own the container, you actually won't need a bearer token. The bearer tokens, if you're allowing other people to access this container via the bearer tokens we talked about earlier. Then what would happen is you'd then choose your file that you want to upload, and we'll do this in a minute. You choose the file you want to upload, and you can see here, this is where we're doing the actual uploading of the code, of the object. So grab the file, read in the file. I've got a progress bar that ticks along showing you how long it's taking. And if you remember, I mentioned that you can actually filter on attributes, and you can even set permissions based on attributes. In this case, on my object, I'm creating two attributes, one being a timestamp, so when was the object actually created, and the other being the file name. This is an interesting feature of NeoFS, because just like containers, we saw that they have an ID, objects get an ID too. However, if you give an object an ID, so if you give it a name, you can actually refer to it by its name, which is pretty interesting when you think you can store entire decentralized websites on NeoFS. If you give it a name, you could call it, for instance, index.html or cat.png. And then as a URL up here, you can actually refer to that object by its real name rather than by its object ID. So attributes are an interesting feature of NeoFS I found as well. Now, I won't go too far into the examples, I think, unless people have specific questions coming up. But what I then did was, as I mentioned, Sam and the NGD guys gave me a grant to build out a API to sort of help people through this without having to do all of this Go code. So you may say I've been long-winded around it because you didn't actually need to see any of that if you're not interested in the Go side of it. Although it does help, I think, if you can scan the code and see what's actually going on under the hood. So I created the Greenfinch API, and this is the if this is the Greenfinch GUI, Greenfinch API is the same interaction with NeoFS but via REST. And this is all the code. It's open. It's actually not open source right now at this moment, but that's only because I haven't opened it. If you want access to it, please message me. I'll give you full access to it. And any bugs or any issues you find, please do open issues or help me update the code. But it's all here, and it will be totally available once it's in a very stable state. Today, it's definitely in an alpha state. If you want to play with it, and that's what we'll do now, you can go to, I don't know if you can see that from there, but it's api.greenfinch.app. That will take you to this page here. And this is my sort of top level overview of the API in its current state. And it's probably worth noting at this point, the API only supports object management. So the API allows you to list your objects, upload objects, download objects, and delete objects. At this point, you would need to create your container through some other method, whether that's, sorry for the cell again, but whether that's using Greenfinch GUI, or you can go here, and I've put a gist up just to help creating a container. So you can run this Go code, and this is basically one of the examples we saw before. And this will create you a container, and it will give you back an ID for that container, which you can then use. So I'm sorry, that bit is slightly rawer now than the API, but once you've got a container, you don't need to do that again. You can do everything based on one container. But once you've got that, we've gone over the Neo developer documentation. We've just seen how to create a container. So once you've got that, you can use the Greenfinch HTTP RESTful API. And so just to give perspective of what the point of this was, there's the sort of underlying issue is that at the moment you would have to share your private key with the underlying code so that you could interact with NeoFS. Now, it's obviously not a good idea to be sharing your private key. And I believe that the NeoFS team are currently working on integrating with Wallet Connect. But today that's not quite possible, so we do have to do it with private keys, but that's just a small element of it. So this actually will be a demonstration of how you can integrate NeoFS with your product without having to share your private keys outside of your sort of environment. So the homepage, the reason I sent us here is because the homepage is a little demo app that you can actually play with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate using the API over HTTP. So no need to understand gRPC, which is the protocol that NeoFS uses, and no need to know Go. If you're a JavaScript developer or Java developer, you can all use it from this point forward. And by the way, this API, as I say, will be open source, but if you want it now to host yourself, I'm more than happy to give it to you. Otherwise, you can use this one. It's not load balanced or anything at this point. It's very much in the making. I'm trying to build it alongside the hackathon, so forgive me slightly for things like stability, but if you try and hammer it with thousands of requests, it might go down. But what I just want to show you is how you would go about interacting with it. And by the way, the code behind this, again, is here. So the code that I'm actually using for this page, no jQuery or anything, I try to keep it as absolutely raw as I possibly could, is all here. So do feel free to come and look through this, see how I'm doing multi-part file uploads, see how I'm doing just raw content uploads, and you'll see what I mean by that in a minute, and et cetera, et cetera. If we go here, so I'm just leaving this open so you can see the requests that actually get made. Because as you can see, at one point, we're going to need our private key. And I want you to see that never goes anywhere. So I've got a public key here. So the first thing you need to do is request a bearer token from the API. And what's going on is you're basically giving the API permission to act on your behalf. So you're basically creating a bearer token that is being given to the API. And then the API will be able to make requests to NeoFS on your behalf. And you sign that bearer token, so you've given it the permission. So the first thing we do is we say, I am the owner of the container, so that's my public key. The container that I'm the owner of has this ID here, which I got from that script I showed you before. When I do this, what we get back, you can see it made a request here, pending. There we go. That is the base64 format of the bearer token. It's currently unsigned, so the API can't actually do anything with that at the moment. So now we need to sign it, and this is the important part. So what's going to happen now, I'm going to pop private key in here, and it's going to sign this bearer token. So I'm going to drop that in there. Some of you wondered whether or not I was going to give that away. But it's actually all testnet. That's also something I should mention at this point. Everything's on the testnet. Again, if you want to run this on the mainnet, you can download a copy of it and change the URL into the network to the mainnet. I wouldn't quite do that yet personally because, as I say, it's still new. At this point here, I'm going to sign this bearer token, and hopefully these aren't anything. But hopefully you'll see that nothing actually leaves my computer. So nothing left the computer there to sign that bearer token. The private key has been used. I can now delete that if you don't trust it. Now what you get back is this R and S value. And the cryptographers amongst you will know that R and S are two large integers that are used as part of the encryption algorithm. I forget which one's actually being used here. But those are what you need now to make the basically do things with NeoFS. And I'll show you this in a second, a bit more detail. So now let's say we want to upload something to NeoFS. We want to put it into this container here. So it's going to use these two values and our bearer token to say, let's upload a multi-part, actually, start with a text plane, it's a bit more basic. So we're going to upload some text as an object into our container. So we can give it any name we want. I've just filled this in for speed, but you can do whatever you like with that. It doesn't have to be JSON. It could literally be raw data. The NeoFS doesn't mind. And then this bit here is those attributes I mentioned. So we can actually add any attributes we like at this point. Importance, very high, whatever it might be. And then this is the data that's going to be uploaded. complete works of William Shakespeare when he was born and when he died. And so now if I click upload, and I've seen enough live demos that don't work, so I'm just hoping this does. Boom. So now we get back our object ID. So up here we use the container ID. We've popped into that container this object, and it gave us back a reference to that object that we can now use. So now down here we can actually start to see if what just happened is real. I'm going to keep this available. But the first thing I'll do is I'll just demonstrate listing out the content of the container. So I don't need an object ID to do that. I'm just saying, give me the IDs of every object. If I make a request on that, there's a big array of lots of object IDs. And actually, I guess if I do that, yeah, there you go. That one is within that list there. So those are all the objects that we can now go and find out what they are. But as we just uploaded this, let's just go and have a look. So if I just paste in that, and I say get that, make the request, and then you can see down here, that's what we got back. The complete works of William Shakespeare. Now what's going on here is this is actually the metadata. You can get the metadata off an object without actually getting the body of it. So I'm returning that as part of the API in the head as a header. I wonder if I can show you that. Just make that request again. If we have a look in here, you can see that there's this NeoFS meta header. So this is all the metadata about that object that I'm just returning there. So if we decode that, we see what's actually inside it. We can see the payload length is 132. But interestingly, you can see down here the attributes. So one of those attributes on there is importance very high. So I just added that attribute. We added the author type, poetry fiction, timestamp. The API will always add the timestamp of when it uploaded it, and it will attach a content type to it based on how we uploaded it. So the API currently supports multi-part form data. Reason being, I spoke to a few people on Discord about what kind of information they want to upload, and mostly of the time it's binary data or files. So I thought that was the best one to support to get out of the box. Let's just try the other type I've got here, which is a multi-part. And this is about choosing a file. So if I just choose some file from my computer, I've got an image here. Let's upload that. There we go. The ID has changed there. So now if I paste that in there, and let's do a get request on that. Make, and there you go. It just returned that image that I had. So this has just come straight off NeoFS. And just to demonstrate that's really working, if I click delete, and we delete this object, we got a 200. So let's try and get it again. We get a 502, and we get if we have a look at the error there, object already removed. So if you want to use this for any project, you're more than welcome to. It's been funded by NGD, so it would be great if it actually got used. Now, I am working on documentation for this as well, which is here. My Swagger skills are pretty new out of the box, but you can come here and see actually how to make these requests. So if you want to post an object, as I said, it's a multi-part data, but you'll need headers for the container ID, your public key, and that RNS value that I mentioned earlier. If you want to get an object, or if you want to list all the objects, it's very similar. So you need the same fields, and depending on the endpoint that you hit will depend on what happens. Now, the one caveat this morning is unfortunately my host, which is render.com, they actually strangely convert head requests to get requests. So that's a bit annoying because you can't just get the metadata at the moment. So I need to rehost it somewhere else where they don't do that. But the idea being that instead of requesting the entire object, you could just request the head of the object, and that would get you all that metadata we looked at here. Now that's pretty handy when you want to sort, or you want to request all objects that have a certain importance, for instance, in their attributes. That's what you might use that kind of thing for. So I don't know whether or not that was too fast or too slow or whatever, but I think I've sort of covered everything that at this point. I guess we still do have sort of 25 minutes left, I realize. But if anyone had any questions or anything, I'm more than happy to answer them. Otherwise, again, I'm Config Wizard on Discord. Please do feel free to come and ask me any questions or get the code or whatever it might be. But apart from that, that's sort of my adventure using NeoFS to date. It has been quite a journey. I've had to learn quite a lot to get here. Um, it's been really good, and I really recommend you guys use it too.
Okay. Thanks for the Alex presentation, and hello. And if you have any questions related to today's topic, you can write them in the devlog test channel. The guest will answer them. I saw that Gil from Alex Lab said GrandShares founded part of Greenfish. Is that right, Alex?
So GrantShares has funded. So GrantShares has funded the API. I have called it Greenfinch because my hackathon project is Greenfinch. I didn't have another name for it. So I guess the name might be confusing things. But the API is funded by GrantShares, yes, not the GUI.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Any other questions? I think the API is very helpful for the NeoFS things. It's very awesome. Especially for me, it's much easier to understand how to interact with NeoFS.
Yeah, that was the idea, Sam. I was
Yeah.
hoping that it would save people a lot of work if they'd used APIs before. They would be a little bit more familiar with this then.
Yeah. Seems several people is testing, typing in the test channel. Let's wait for a minute. Yeah. New enthusiast said it's very explanatory from you. It's
Thank you. I hope so. I didn't. Yeah. So I didn't plan it out too much, so I wasn't sure whether I was going to make any sense or not.
yeah. As she's typing, I think it's a lot of words. I think I thought he's typing a long time.
As well. Yeah, I'm watching the channel as well. It's getting nervous.
Oh, another question pop up. Great work. Do you see a need for GUI for the storage provider side as well? Or is current steps easy enough for anyone to pick up if they want to provide storage on NeoFS?
That's interesting. I think what you're referring to is whether or not how would you become a node on the network? There isn't a GUI at the moment for it. There are. I mean, I haven't done it really myself, but I've looked through the code on GitHub and the repositories and the instructions there. If it's anything like the other clients that have been made, I think it would be reasonably straightforward, especially if you were going down that route. I mean, it's a good point. We could add a storage provider GUI on top of Greenfinch as well. I haven't done it, but good idea.
Yeah, the question from H. The API looks awesome, and that's really gonna lower the barrier to entry for devs. Exciting to try it. He's curious about the NeoFS storage price. He know we are long before Anyface markets starting take over, but do you have any estimates for gas usage so far?
So yeah, I've only been using it on the test net, so the gas is extremely cheap there, and it's not representative of mainnet. I've spoken to the team at the NSPCC about this. One thing is the plan is to keep it as cheap, if not cheaper than S3, as a sort of benchmark thought. But it's actually not easy to estimate. the cost. You can't really, well, from my understanding, you can't really take an object and work out how much that's going to cost you. One of the before you actually upload it. Now, one of the things I did plan on doing once I got a little bit further with this is uploading some objects of different sizes into different containers, which are on different policies, and basically just keeping a track of how much each one has cost me to build a sort of empirical idea of the costs. But I do plan going back to the NSPCC and talking to them about that just to see if we can benchmark some costs around that. But no, I can't give you a straightforward answer because I don't think there is a straightforward answer.
Okay. Seems Gui is typing something. Maybe we can wait for his question. Okay. Gui, that's the question from Gui. One of the things we observed at X Labs is that the multiple programming languages need to interface with NeoFS, not only NeoW3G, but also NeoBOA, etc. It's a little bit provocative question from his side. Why depths of different programming language will target your API than implementing API clients directly to the NeoFS node?
I mean, so yeah, I mean, I like the question, but I think you do know the answer. But it's taken quite a long time to get code into a state, even in Go, that I found it usable for the projects that I wanted to use it on it. If you wanted to port it to other programming languages, go right ahead and do that. One thing that I have actually looked into and will be looking further into once I have completed the hackathon is building shared libraries. So I plan on compiling the code down to an object file that you could then use in any program language you liked without having to use the RESTful API at all, and also not having to write any low-level code to interact with NeoFS either. It's very much very early days and not usable at the moment, so don't go clicking in there. It will not be worthwhile of your time. And in fact, I think you and I spoke about this once. So I think that would be the way I would do that. If you were going to do that, I wouldn't try and port all the code over to a programming language. But really, the reason we did this was not so much to try and stop people doing what you're suggesting, but was to make the barrier to entry for people to use NeoFS much lower. But if you had a use case, I'm sure the community would love it if it was ported to more languages than just Go. There is a C# library. I haven't used it, and I think I heard of someone trying to build a Node one, but they got stuck at the encryption point. That's probably a question for the NSPCC as to where you would get issues and blockers in terms of doing that.
Okay. Thanks for answer. Gil is typing. Let's see what's gonna happen. He said he took a look at your shared library and we definitely should collaborate. He has a similar setup for new W3G. However, they hate the problem of marshalling request of to NeoFS and stuff, but they can definitely chat once maybe you guys can check after this call.
Well,
That's
I
a
think the way
great.
I would do that is I do it the same way as I'm doing it in the API, just not using REST. But only pass between them the bearer tokens, rather than anything more than that. And just don't use REST to do it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's awesome. So anyone else has question with Alex? You can type your question in the devlog test channel. If not, I think that's the end of this workshop.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, I think that's all. Thank you, Alex, and thank you everyone for joining us. And one last thing,